All right, well, welcome to the webinar today. I'm so glad to have you all joining us. I'm sure, like I said, we'll have some more people trickling in. We're really excited to bring you this webinar and to introduce a really great new tool that can help with strategic grouping with the Community Eligibility Provision, or CEP. So throughout today's webinar, as you have questions, whether it's about CEP specifically or grouping specifically or something else, feel free to send your questions into the Q&A box. If you can locate that on your Zoom panel there, you can send questions there. We also have a dedicated time at the end of the webinar today to answer your questions. So you can choose to raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask it aloud. Or like I said, use that Q&A box there. Today's webinar will be recorded and shared with anyone who registered, as well as a copy of the slides and a link to Meals Count, which you should already have. But don't have to worry about taking copious notes because this will be available to you afterwards as well. And this is our agenda for today. I'm going to walk through some of Community Eligibility Provision basics, and then I'm going to hand it over to Nikolai, who you can probably see on video. He is the lead developer for Meals Count, which is that amazing new grouping tool that I mentioned. And I also want to introduce on the line today is my colleague Tamlyn Kelly. You can also see her there on video. We are very excited that Tam will be joining No Kid Hungry's Center for Best Practices team. She's done extensive anti-hunger work in Maryland and continues to support our Maryland No Kid Hungry efforts. And she's joining to help round out some of the CEP work that we're doing, but also do a lot of work around SNAP and PEBT. So we're really grateful to have her on the line and all of her expertise and wisdom as it relates to CEP and broader. So I've given both of them permission to interrupt me throughout to add more about CEP. Really, this isn't a huge group today, so feel free to interrupt, send questions. Like I said, we want to make this as useful for you as possible. So without further ado, let's dive into some CEP. The Community Eligibility Provision is a school meals funding option that enables schools to provide free meals to all students, regardless of their individual income. This year, CEP is an incredibly important tool as we look to an unprecedented school year where families are struggling more than they ever have been. We don't know whether students are going to be returning to the classroom. There's access questions around whether kids are going to be able to access those school meals that 22 million families before the pandemic relied on to feed their kids. And we also know that schools are facing really unprecedented budget deficits, and CEP can be a strategy, not just this year to help schools recover financially, specifically the school nutrition budget, but also for the next 3 years, because CEP is a 4-year cycle. And so this year presents a really unique opportunity to adopt CEP and to provide this benefit to families and students who are going to be struggling more than they have been in years past. So CEP is often heralded as the antidote to school lunch shaming, and that's because, again, schools that adopt this provision provide meals to all students at no cost to them, so that you are not having students pay those co-pays for reduced price or paid meals. Every student can participate in breakfast and lunch for free. And so we know that school lunch shaming has shown up in the media quite a bit in the last couple of years, and CEP is really a way to completely eliminate school meals debt. You're no longer collecting charges from each student. You're not tracking school meals debt by family, by student. And students under CEP just have equitable access to all meals. And therefore that reduces stigma. The reduced stigma and equitable access taken together often increase participation in school meals, especially when schools adopt breakfast after the bell in tandem with CEP, again, just removing those access barriers to students. And CEP administratively really can decrease that administrative burden and overhead. So you're no longer in many states collecting, distributing, analyzing school meals applications. You're no longer collecting charges for meals. You're no longer tracking unpaid meal debt. And so this decreased administrative burden can really allow you to be more flexible with your school nutrition staff and have them focus on food service. And school nutrition funds really can benefit tremendously from adopting CEP. We've seen many schools and districts adopt CEP and actually see revenue increase over traditional counting and claiming. and we'll get into the reimbursement here in a moment with CEP, but really that hinges on the decreasing administrative burden and the increased participation. And depending on your ISP, your identified student percentage, you may be able to get 100% of your meals reimbursed at the free rate, again, regardless of individual student eligibility. So again, I just want to reiterate that CEP is a 4-year cycle, and the reason why that's so critical this year is that ISPs are increasing. So the identified student percentage is highly tied to SNAP participation, and SNAP participation has been increasing nationwide, so we've seen ISPs increasing nationwide, which means that this presents a unique opportunity for schools to lock in a higher ISP than they may have seen in years past for the next 4 years. And so assuming that we return to a normal school schedule eventually, and we get kids back in the classroom and back in school sometime in the next couple of years, you will reap the benefits of that increased participation, really the full benefits of CEP as it relates to revenue generation. So who can participate in CEP? An individual school or group of schools can have an identified student percentage of 40% to operate CEP. And that identified student percentage is the percentage of your total student body that is categorically eligible for free school meals. And those kids are typically found through direct certification. So students can be included in the ISP if they participate or if a household member participates in SNAP, TANF, FDPR, or in Medicaid free. I realize it's cut off there at the bottom here, but 19 states are running that Medicaid direct certification pilot. And so that asterisk is there because Medicaid is not a category for direct certification in every state, and also because only Medicaid free counts. So I know that some states do both Medicaid free and reduced to directly certify students for free and reduced price meals. But for CEP and the purposes of calculating your ISP, only Medicaid free students can be counted in that ISP. So I say that a student can be identified by their participation or a household member's participation because, for example, if I am a student and I am found to be on SNAP through my state's direct certification system, but I have a cousin who lives at my same address and they are not showing up on the SNAP direct certification list or any direct certification list. By virtue of living in the same household at the same address, so long as the school can verify that, you can extend my eligibility to my cousin's eligibility. So that would bring both of us into the ISP. So that's a really critical piece of, I know this year, making sure that all of the new families and new students who are showing up on SNAP lists, we're also checking that schools are also checking addresses to make sure that we're extending the eligibility to students who live in households but may not show up on the direct certification list themselves. So for these 4 top programs here, you can extend, it's sometimes called sibling eligibility, you can extend eligibility to other members in the household, even if they themselves are not showing up on the direct certification list. And then you can also include students, should also include students in your school who are identified as in foster care, experiencing homelessness, who are in Head Start or Early Head Start, if your school has those programs, and or are migrant. So these students should also be included in the ISP, but their eligibility does not extend to other members of the household. So by a similar example, if I am in school and I have a younger sibling at that same district and they are in Head Start, they would be included in the ISP, but I would not be. Their eligibility cannot extend to me based on these 4 categories down here. So to identify these students, every state it looks a little bit different. Some states have foster care, homeless data, Head Start, migrant data incorporated into their state's direct certification systems. Some, they only have SNAP and TANF, and you will have to go to your district's homeless liaison or McKinney-Vento liaison or your Head Start director or the migrant ed coordinator. So these are all of the different ways to identify students and really maximize your ISP. Anything to add, Tam, before I move on here?
That was great, Emily. I will just say that schools that are using CEP, all the students in that school are also eligible for PEBT, which hopefully will be extended this year. That's the cash benefit provided to families that qualify for free or reduced meals. In CEP schools, all the students receive that benefit. So this coming year, that could be a tremendous benefit to students.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about the ISP and about eligibility for CEP, but the ISP is also important because it establishes your reimbursement under CEP. So with CEP, there are two categories for reimbursement, free and paid, and we get rid of the reduced price category. To calculate the percentage of the meals that you serve that will be reimbursed at the free rate, you're going to take your ISP and multiply it by 1.6, which is a federally established multiplier. So it's the same in every state. And so for example, if your ISP is 55% multiplied by 1.6, 88% of the breakfast and lunches that you serve will be reimbursed at the free rate. And then the remainder, 100% minus your ISP times 1.6, will be reimbursed at the paid rate. So in that example, you'd have 12% of your meals reimbursed at the paid rate. The magic ISP that everyone's seeking is 62.5%. So that is the ISP at which all of the meals are reimbursed at the free rate. So 62.5 times 1.6 gives you 100%. I do want to mention that 62.5% does get you all of the meals, and it's really a no-brainer to operate CEP if you have that high of an ISP, but it is not the ISP at which CEP becomes financially viable. We see many schools and many districts operate CEP from even as low as 40%, and they can still make it work. Again, looking at some of those additional benefits that CEP provides, driving up participation. We've seen schools adopt CEP that haven't done breakfast after the bell, that have had really low breakfast participation, see breakfast increase 400% and just generate a ton of revenue. So it really is a personal kind of question for each school and district at where that ISP needs to be for it to be financially viable. Luckily, this grouping calculator and some other financial tools will help you make those decisions. So I've mentioned SNAP enrollment is increasing in the 3 months from March through May. We've seen SNAP nationwide increase 17%. And so that is reflecting in many schools' ISPs this year. We encourage everyone to conduct direct certification often to ensure that every eligible child is captured in your school's ISPs. But for the purposes of electing CEP for this upcoming school year, the data has to be from March through June. So right now would be really time to look at your March through June data, add in other students who are at that same address through extended eligibility, reaching out to your homeless liaisons if you haven't done so, to get every kid who could have possibly been included in your ISP from March through June in your ISPs before applying or declaring your intent to elect CEP this year. And then if you can find students who are continuing to be added to SNAP and TANF and these other benefits programs and categories, if by next year your ISPs have actually increased because kids continue to be added, you can lock in a new 4-year cycle at the end of next school year. So you can report that your ISPs have increased, start a new 4-year cycle. Now you're reaping the benefits of CEP through 2025. So it's really critical to keep conducting direct certification. We know that participation in these programs is fluid and families will go off and on. So at least doing monthly is really best practice. Ooh. So why CEP this year? Again, we've talked a lot about this. CEP will really help with more complex school meals operations with counting and claiming. Under traditional operations when kids are in school, we see a lot of school nutrition directors elect to count just the total number of meals they serve by using a clicker or using a tally on paper. your state agency has to approve your plan. So if you have a school environment that is, kids might go to a grab and go cart or go to the cafeteria or access meals in a different way, and you can't really prevent against a kid getting multiple meals from different locations, you might still have to swipe ID cards again to prevent double counting. But if you have a controlled environment where kids are eating in the classroom, where every kid is going through the cafeteria lunch line and going to a different place to go eat, you can do a clicker or a tally and really cut down on some of the time that it takes to move kids through a lunch line in the cafeteria, and cut down on some of the paperwork and the individual tracking by student IDs. Safety, it helps with safety this year if you're going to have kids in school, to not have them touching pin pads, swiping IDs, exchanging cash if you weren't doing CEP. So CEP can really help with increasing safety around meal service this year as well. And easier training for non-food service staff. We know that if you're doing meals in the classroom this year, teachers are going to be charged with helping with counting and claiming, as they'll be the person serving them in many cases. And so it's just less for teachers to have to worry about if they can just use their roster and check off which students have taken meals, or if they can just do a total count instead of having to learn who's free, reduced, and paid, etc., and track accordingly. We also, again, decreasing financial stress among families is huge, and not having to worry about school meal debt is huge, not collecting fees. And if there's ever a year where we don't want the general fund to bail out the school nutrition fund with unpaid school meal charges at the end of the year, it's this one. We want education dollars going to really critical education support. So just canceling school meal debt, or not creating any more, is a really, really huge benefit to CEP. And again, can help for the next 4 years generate revenue and help budgets recover. And as Tam mentioned earlier, if PEBT is reauthorized, CEP schools will have an easier job distributing funds, and more kids in your district would be able to benefit from that really crucial benefit. I've talked a lot, Tam. Anything to add here on the benefits of CEP?
Gosh. There was a question about the deadline for ISP data. Because of COVID, USDA did extend that to June 30th, as you mentioned. And, as you mentioned as well, the students are continuing to enroll in SNAP and TANF and other programs through July and August. Unfortunately, those kids will not be able to count in the ISP reimbursement rate that's being locked in right now. But as you mentioned, Emily, you will be able to set a new reimbursement rate at this time next year if it's still going, if your rates are still going up.
Thank you. All right, and I've seen some really helpful chats here that I'm guessing some school nutrition folks on the line have said, when tallying, as in total meal counts, you need to be careful about double claiming meals, especially if you have an administrative review coming up. So thank you for that flag. Always accountability is important, but you really don't want to be caught having to try to explain why your meal counts are higher than your enrollment for a day. So yes, very, very important to be careful about that. And for some districts this year, because we are looking at a variety of different school meal service options, and some really don't have the same controlled environment as you might during a typical school year. Some state agencies are asking to do that individual student recording. This year just depends on what your back to school environment looks like, and whether or not you can control and use total meal counts over identifying individual students. But hopefully in the next couple of years, you could get back to a more controlled environment and really benefit from that decreased administrative burden too. I think we're about ready to turn it over to Meals Count and talk about grouping. I have some additional resources here that can help, that are all featured on our website. And my contact information is here. I'll chat these things into the chat as well. but really excited to hand it over to Nikolai to walk through this exciting new grouping tool and talk about grouping and the importance of it. So let me make you the host here, Nikolai. And
great, thank you so much.
You should be able to share your screen now.
All right, can you hear me all right?
Yep, sound great.
All right, go ahead and share my screen here. All right, well, thank you very much, Emily, and thank you to No Kid Hungry for allowing me to come here and present on this webinar. I'm really excited to share meals count and the tool here, and then go do a virtual tour and kind of walk through and kind of explain how to use it, and then hopefully, time allowing, do a quick live demo just to get everyone a feel for the tool and how to use it. Right. So just in terms of what meals count is, so at the broadest level, meals count has been a partnership or the result of a partnership with Open San Diego, which is a volunteer-based organization from where I am here in San Diego, where we do kind of what we call civic tech, where we work on projects for the government and non-government organizations. And we've been partnering with California food policy advocates and San Diego Hunger. So if you see a lot of California references, that's because that's been kind of the origination here. Had really two great partners with CFPA and SD Hunger. And then also excited now to work a little bit with No Kid Hungry as well. And Emily has been really spearheading, collaborating, and just making the tool better. So very excited about that. All right, so talking about how meals count works. So really meals count is a very specific tool that targets the specific challenge and opportunity in CEP, which is the grouping. So when you get your CEP application, you have all your different schools or sites, and you're allowed to group them into bundles any way you want. That will allow you to change or submit the aggregate ISP for each group. So you can bundle two schools together of different ISPs, and the aggregate, the total ISP there, the total eligible versus the total enrolled, will be the one that is taken to trigger the funding levels, reimbursement levels that Emily talked about. So really what meals count does is it takes that data and takes it in and uses computers to run a whole bunch of different grouping scenarios, because this is at the end of the day a computer science problem. And then it creates a recommendation at the end, looking at what the highest potential reimbursement is, and then also some other metrics that we can do. And really allows you to also adjust which schools are coming in and look at different scenarios for some of the things that are not as clear, like participation rate, since that might change. So really kind of jumping into why grouping matters. So here's a really simple example. So if you have 4 schools, 2 at 85% and 2 at 40%. So if you were to naively group them the wrong way and put the 40% together and 85% together, what you're really doing is you're losing the slack in the 85% ISP, because anything over 62.5% is just getting full free reimbursement. And so you're not getting as much reimbursement as you could do. Switch it around and group them this way, and suddenly everybody is running at 62.5% and you get the full free reimbursement the whole way. Now, obviously for 4 schools, this is pretty dead simple, but due to math and such, as soon as you get to 11 schools, you know, you spend a lot of money on cloud services before you even get the slightest answer that's decent without some sort of algorithmic work. So a concrete example here, one of the schools that we've been working with that's going to be using their recommendation for meals count this year, just running just amount of time spent in our optimizer, a low-end optimization versus a longer spent optimization, we saw a boost in the same number of schools all participating in CEP of 13% increase in reimbursement, which for them was, you know, over $250,000, give or take. This is, you know, based upon the standard rates, but either way, a 13% increase. You can scale that to your anticipated reimbursement. That's pretty common. I mean, it's plus or minus. It's really, you know, some people see 2% increase on optimized, and some people see, you know, 15% or more on the optimized scenario. So, but in reality, I mean, if you're going to be doing CEP, this is essentially free money in the sense that you, just by running this tool, you will probably see an increase in the overall reimbursement for the same schools going to CEP. So that's kind of the general overview, and I hope it's pretty compelling. So I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the virtual tour now, where I'm just going to walk through the process of using the meals count tool. It is a web-based tool, and just there's some specifics in doing it since we have to kind of get data in and data out, and I'm just going to walk through that. And you can see here's the URL is going to be www.mealscount.com. Should be pretty simple, and that's my email address. We can share that afterwards also if you have further questions. So the first thing is the important data you have to have lined up for meals count. So you have to have a spreadsheet list of all the schools, and for each school, the critical information is going to be your total enrollment, your unduplicated number of identified students. So that's really the ISP, the identified student number, which we refer to as total eligible in meals count. So we want to know the total enrolled and the total eligible, and then we need to know the average daily participation for breakfast and lunch. It's really critical that that part can actually influence the number quite a bit, because you only get reimbursement for the meals you serve. So if you have school that might have a high SP but a low participation rate, that would change how the grouping tool could optimize it based upon that. So it's important to get that in there. And the key thing there is that this is a daily average. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of some of the challenges in coming up with that number, especially right now in the strange world we live in. And that's maybe a question also for Emily and Tam at the end. And then finally, the federal reimbursement rate. So you'll need to figure out what your federal reimbursement rate, and maybe Emily and Tam can talk about understanding that, but that's something that is a plug number you have to do in meals count. So just going through the simple walkthrough here. So the first step is to go to mealscount.com. You should see something that looks like that. And then the first thing is you're going to click on Find Your District at the top. This is going to take you to a map. If you're in California, you're lucky. We've had the data. We've got that all plugged into the website. Probably next year we'll have a lot more of the data, but for everybody else, you just have to click on your state and you'll get this pop up, and you have to click Enter Your District data. And what that's going to do is that's going to pull you into a district detail. And I'll just kind of talk about the general pattern, if you haven't done this already, is we're going to go to that district detail thing where we add one school in, just the basic numbers for one school, and then we export it out to a spreadsheet. And then you can open an Excel or anything similar, and you can fill in the rest of your schools really quickly in the spreadsheet. And then you can save that and load that back into Meals Count. You can also load all the data directly into Meals Count on the website itself, but it's usually, if you're comfortable with the spreadsheet, it's a lot faster. So I'm going to cover this process just quickly. So you go into your, so you click Enter a New District, you'll go into your district right here. In the bottom, you see Begin Adding Schools. It should say Untitled District, depending on the state. And then in here, there's going to be a school row at the bottom there, and you need to go in and enter in all those fields, which I'll talk about a little in the future, a little further along. And then at the end, you hit Add School, and then it's going to show the school in there. And at that point, you can click on, and I kind of jumped the gun here a little bit. You click Export to CSV, and then you have to click Download here. And then that's going to download a CSV file, which you can then double click and open into Excel. In Excel, you'll see that it comes out with these specific columns. And again, I'll be talking about those in a few minutes, but at that point, you're just going to go and fill in the rest of these rows here for the rest of your schools, ignoring the lunch rates and the paid rates and so on the right. We just want for the first row. And then you hit Import File again. And then from there, you'll drag and drop your CSV file or Excel file, either one works, on there and click Import. And then you can click Edit and Submit, and it's going to go ahead and do a pop-up. Now it's going to take, in some cases for schools 11 or less, it takes just a few seconds. For everybody else, it can take up to, if you're like 20 schools, 40 schools, it can take up to 2 minutes, 3 minutes. You know, the extremes of it would be like LA and New York. If you are LA and New York, first of all, you should just contact me, but secondly, it will take up to 5 minutes to run LA. So that's about as long as it gets. So it does take a few minutes now. That's just because we've been optimizing it recently, and it's getting better and better results, but that takes a little bit longer. And then once that's done, you'll get your full information here at the top, and you'll get your full school information, district information here in a summary. It's going to have different fields. So you can scroll down once that's been calculated, and you can see the different schools, and you'll see that they're color coded, but the different fields are going to show your different groupings that it's recommending. So just kind of going through that detailed view once you have the schools there. So the first column is going to be the recommended grouping. That's going to be just a numerical grouping. So all the ones should go together, all the twos should go together. And again, it's going to be color coded and so on. Then there's going to be a school code and a name for the school. And those are really for reference. We do need those to be filled out because that's how we sort and show the schools. But what value that is up to your district. And the type of school, again, that's not even for you guys. That's not going to be relevant. That was really kind of for California in terms of sorting out charter versus public schools. So a critical field would be total enrolled and total eligible. So those are the numbers that you filled in, and that should be shown in those columns. And that's going to be in there. And I have some California specific things here I forgot to strip out. So But you should be able to figure that out for your state. So after that, continuing, there's going to be the average breakfast daily participation. So again, that's a daily average. And then a lunch average daily participation. So again, if you had 100 schools in your school or on that site, and 50 of them bought breakfast, that'd be average daily participation of 50. Or if you had a better example, you had 60 schools and 50% or 30, it's going to be the number, not the percentage. So that's the key part. It's the number of meals, not the percentage that are in there. So it would be 30 out of 60, and maybe 50 bought lunch, but that wouldn't, not 50% or anything like that. Including optimization, this is a checkbox. So as you're going through and trying to figure out which schools you want to include in the group calculations for CEP, a lot of districts I've worked with, they're not doing all the schools at once. That's really kind of a district specific question. So you can take schools out of the optimization if you don't want them to include them. Some of them you just are not appropriate, like charter schools and so on. But other situations are just schools that they just decided not to. So you can uncheck it. It won't include it in the grouping calculation. This is different from a group that ends up being below the threshold. So sometimes meals count will sort out all the groups, all the schools that are below the threshold that it can't pair with schools above the threshold. So we'll have a group ISP under 40%, and those will just have $0 for reimbursement at the end of calculation. And that's not one you're going to submit to CEP. It still shows up because that's just meals count just does that as part of the calculation. That's different from including an optimization, which says, do we even want to consider this, or do we not even want to consider this? And then finally, the calculated fields, you're going to see the estimated school ISP. So that's based upon the enrolled and the eligible that we've gotten there. And then whether or not it's CEP eligible, this is really just a flag if it's above or below the 40% threshold at the school level. And then finally, the estimated annual reimbursement. So that's per school based upon the current grouping and the current rates that you've entered in a 180-day year, calendar year, what we expect to the annual reimbursement to be. So that's kind of, again, showing the broader view here. So at that point, once you've got this in the system and you've done that kind of bulk load in the beginning, you can click edit at the top here and just go ahead and tune things as you're exploring or testing things. You can also just keep on re-importing with CSV file. This is really kind of as you get familiar with the tool. But clicking the edit button will take you to an editable screen here. And at this point, you can go in and change the values. So you might want to uncheck including optimization. One thing is as participation rates change, so as you're looking at different participation rate scenarios, that's something we've seen a lot, especially right now, just because of the uncertainty. You can do this here, or you can take an Excel spreadsheet. And what I've seen people do is create a baseline column that's ignored by meals count, and then create their actual average participation and just use a formula to say, plus 5% or minus 5% for each of the participation rates, and just run a couple different scenarios and kind of see where the reimbursement lands, and kind of just explore that in different scenarios. So those are all fields you can tune here and then rerun as much as you want. This tool is freely available all the time, so please do use it. So just in terms of the editing fields, just to kind of remind everyone that these are the editable fields are kind of the inputs to the system. That's the total enrolled, the total eligible or identified students, your average daily participation rate for breakfast and lunch, and then again, do we want to consider the school? So including optimization. The other thing important to mention at the top, if you scroll back up again, is you will see the federal reimbursement rates. So there are some predefined ones in there that I think are not even up to date, and Emily can probably chime in on that. So it's really important to get the right rates in here if you're looking at the actual the reimbursement number at the end of the day, to make sure that those rates are tied to your district and are the appropriate ones. That's the free and paid lunch rate and the free and paid breakfast rate. So getting that in there is really critical, because until you get that in there, you can't really rely on the annual reimbursement number that's coming out. So the other thing is, as I said, as you're going through and you're just doing things, you can add and remove schools, or you can include or remove them from the optimization. So you might want to remove a school if you're looking at something that will remove the row. Unchecking, checking will include an optimization changes whether or not it's part of the calculation. You can add a school. There's an add school button, just as we did in the beginning there. You can drop in and you can enter in all those fields. It's really critical you enter the school code and school name, just because those fields help show results at the end. And again, just going through, once you've made any changes, you can click submit. it's going to do a little pop-up, and that again is also wrong. It's not 30 seconds anymore. It's now up to 5 minutes. So apologies on that. But that will take quite a while. They'll show you a little timer, but just don't change the window, just leave it open, and it's running in the background. We'll get to that. So, and then once you're complete, you'll see a little notice that completed, and usually say how much time it took, and then you'll see the updated color codes and so on. If you scroll up, you can see some aggregate information. So you're going to see things like the estimated annual reimbursement on the whole. It will, for the curious, will show you which algorithm had the highest percentage, highest results. So we've got a basket of different algorithms. You know, Emily's been working with a special team to add one more there. Hopefully we'll give some increased results. So really excited. That should show up this week. So we're always trying to improve those algorithms that are kind of doing the number crunching behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, we pick the one that gives the best result. So an important note here, just as I say this, so what we've seen is that this has really been a great tool. We've seen, you know, tons of districts all around California and around the country who've been using it just there. Now, if you have a school where you have a district, if you've got 11 or less districts, we're showing you the best possible scenario because we run every single possible combination and pick that one. Above that, we do a best effort. We really do a big number crunching to get the best possible result we can get. As we get bigger and bigger schools, it's possible to tune it more. We've really kind of optimized the best blend of, you know, getting it done in a sane amount of time and working for as many districts as possible. If you're a larger school or if you're interested in trying to tune that more, please do contact us. There's a contact button right there, the big contact link on the website, and just submit. And we are definitely responding to people submitting, especially in this kind of high season. The other thing is also, there's a lot of schools have come to us, or districts have come to us with special requirements, such as some schools, some districts want to have only 100% coverage of the full free rate schools participating. They want to kind of push those, maximize those numbers. There are some things we can do that are not easily done on the website, but in our tool set, you know, kind of on a one-off basis, we can run those custom scenarios. So if you do feel like you have a special scenario or you have questions about that, please do contact us and we'll try to get back to you and see if we can do something for that. All right, so one other thing is you can click by group and you can see summaries per group. This is useful just to kind of see where the estimated reimbursement is and what the group ISPs are for that current run of calculation that you did. So in terms of saving your work, really what we do here is we just export to CSV. Anytime you export to CSV, it's going to download the current groupings that you're seeing and then the current reimbursements and all the income importing data. You can use that same file to re-import it again and run it again, but that's really kind of the way we save the data and keep track of it. So make sure you do that at the end of it, is hit export to CSV and save that spreadsheet file and give it a name and put it somewhere. So again, if you hit export CSV, cover this again, you hit download. And then one key note, and I talked about this a little bit before, is that when you have that CSV file, we support XLS, XLSX, so you can save it and add some formulas to it, as long as this sheet is the first sheet in your workbook. Now there's going to be the free paid rate, lunch rate, and breakfast rate. So that will be saved if you customize it on the website. You just need to keep those in there for the first row, and that will make sure that that rate, if you reload that same spreadsheet in again, if that rate is sticky and stays there, so you're seeing the same number as you go forward. So just make sure to keep that in there and don't change that. And then again, you can just resubmit again, edit and submit. So just kind of recapping the important notes here is that you want to make sure you do export to CSV to save it. And you can create any number of those export CSVs. You can just keep on downloading those scenarios, and please do use a tool to explore different scenarios. And you can re-import those files again, and then you edit and submit to recalculate the estimates. And it is possible as we release updated version that we'll get an improvement on that, but you know, definitely we'll keep on going. All right, that's kind of lightning tour. So I think if we have a little time here, I'm going to quickly actually do a live example of this, which is always interesting, but I think will be helpful to show everyone what we're doing here. So here again is mealscount.com. So I'm just going to refresh the page here. So you can see here we have some information on the website. So really the first thing is going to be clicking find your district at the top here. And so here you're going to see all the different states. Again, California is green because we have pre-filled information, but if you're not in California, you can just click another state, your state specifically, and then hit enter your district data. So here you can see it's going to have an empty thing here. So at the bottom, you can hit begin adding schools. And at this point, we'd add the first school code, you know, and school name. And then you can enter total enrolled, total eligible, average daily participation, average lunch, average daily participation, click add school. Once that row is in there, you can export the CSV file and then download this file. And then at that point, you can open this file here and somewhere it's opening. So it loaded somewhere, but here I'll show another one that, oh, there we go. So here you can see when I've opened it, it automatically loaded the first row here with the data I just hid. So I can just start filling in the rest of the rows here, leaving these rates here at the top blank. But I can just go ahead and enter the school code, school name, total enrolled, total eligible, breakfast, lunch, and then include optimization. You can just do one of these things here like that. And then state and the district. You can just, I mean, these fields aren't critical, but you can just fill those in and drop it down. So once you've done that, just close this one here. You can go ahead and click import from file. At this point, I have one here already. That's a fast one from Fall River Joint Unified here. And then click import. So you can see it pop in there from behind. You just close the window here. And then at that point, you click submit top here because it's still in edit mode. You can just double check they've got everything you wanted there and all the schools got loaded in. And then you click submit. And then it's going to go and it's going to run. This one again is less than 11 schools, so it just happens pretty instantaneously. And this is the exhaustive or best possible scenario. And you see it's got 2 big groups here, and it shows the total reimbursement. And then again, to save this result, I will go export CSV, and I can download that file again. And then I could go back and I could tune it. Say I, for whatever reasons, I decided that I didn't want to include Mount Bernie Special Education Center. I said, oh, that's not actually one of our schools, very likely. So we submit again. And at this point, it's going to go in there. You can see it's grayed out in the 0 group because this is not one of the ones we're including. And then we now have a new grouping here. It's divided this into 3 different groups, and it's showing that this has changed here. All right, so that kind of concludes my demo. I'll turn it over to Emily now, and hopefully it generates some questions, and there we go.
All right, thanks so much for that tour of Meals Count. Let's see if I can reclaim my hosting privileges here. And yeah, we are happy to take questions now. If anyone has questions on how to use the tool, any questions about what the tool does and doesn't do, any general questions about grouping and CEP, we are here to answer any and all questions that you may have. So you can choose to raise your hand as well, and we can unmute you and you can ask your question out loud or send them in that Q&A section. So we had one question come in about why this tool isn't being used just automatically at the state agency or at the federal level, as opposed to having districts do the calculations. It's a good question. I think in an ideal world, we would have states looking really at the ideal grouping scenario, but this is a brand new tool that just came out a couple months ago. So it's going to take some time to get folks up to speed that is available for use. I liked the tagline "free money with meals count" there, Nikolai, because that's really what it is. It's just strategic grouping to maximize federal reimbursement. So if you are in the advocate role and on the webinar, I think it'd be a great idea to take both this recording and play with the tool yourself with the districts that you're working with and talk to state agencies about it. And really showcase it because it is so powerful. And we had a question come in. You can also see it in the answered section. Would it be possible to group in a school with a ISP of less than 40% itself? The answer is yes, so long as the combined weighted ISP for the group is above 40%. I have a really basic example of a slide that I might be able to pull up here, although my computer tends to be pretty slow at pulling up new files when I'm sharing my screen on Zoom. But we essentially, if you have a school that say has an ISP of 35%, on its own, it's not going to be eligible to operate CEP. If, however, you can group that school with other schools that have ISPs that are higher, you would sum the total number of identified students across your proposed group, and you would sum the total enrollment across the proposed group, and then you would divide the total number of identified students by the total enrollment. If that number, that ISP, is greater than 40%, you can adopt them together as a group, even though you have a school in that group that on its own is not individually eligible to operate CEP. So grouping is a strategy to both maximize federal reimbursement, but also to maximize the number of students and schools participating in CEP. So I will share a basic example of what that looks like after, because my file folder is not responding at the moment. So we had a question about when do we anticipate expanding this map broader than California? Nikolai, I'm not sure if you want to answer this first.
Sure. Yeah, so I think kind of two parts to that. One, this is a volunteer-driven tool, so our time is kind of hit and miss on this. We do try to get things moving forward, but that's just kind of the background on that. Number two is that I think that, right now, up until, as Emily said, the tool has actually been in development for over a year and a half now, almost 2 years in terms of the total project. So this is really the culmination of us kind of really establishing it. It's not been an easy problem, so to say, but we've been mostly California focused up to this point. So one of the challenges is that if you preload the data, that data is not actually kind of the end of the road. Even for California, it causes many headaches for us to say, here's the California data, because that data is coming out of California's systems, but any district, they're not going to be completely in alignment. So the ISP that we show there pre-built is just the SNAP numbers from California. And then from there, the direct certification numbers. From there, the schools have to really go through and seek the other opportunities in improving the ISP with the sibling matches and so on that Emily referred to. So it's really kind of a starting point. And same thing is that the school list we get there, they might include charter schools that are not part of the district's nutrition program, but might not include preschools, which are potentially part of the district's nutrition program under CEP. So having pre-filled data is both a benefit and a curse in that it's nice to show up and see something familiar, but at the same point in time, it is not the place. So if you go to the California ones, you have a big notice saying, this is not the data you need to be using. You need to be using your specific district data. So the short answer is, we hope to have that soon, but then you're gonna have a big notice also that says you still need to put your data in here, because this is only to make you feel familiar, not necessarily to, and maybe speed up things a little bit, but not necessarily the data that you need to be entering into it.
Yeah. I think the other piece is, although for many states, the identified student percentage and total enrollment is publicly available on state agency websites and, for example, on FRAC CEP database. The tool also includes ADP in breakfast and lunch, which is not publicly available data. So to expand this tool as it is in California, we're going to have to probably get some MOUs with state agencies to be able to preload that data in. And Tam just offered to pull up the grouping slide, but I actually finally got it to work here. Okay. So let's, in a moment, tell me if you can see that. Can you see this example grouping scenario?
Yes.
Cool. So school B on its own, again, I had this example in mind, is an ISP of 35%. And when grouped together strategically with A and C, now I did not use meals count to see if this was the best grouping scenario, but also doesn't have ADP information in there. This is an example of how you could bring a school that has a lower than 40% ISP onto CEP. So when summing the number of identified students, you sum this column, and then divide. You can't just find the average of the ISPs. So that's an important note when grouping. You don't just take the average of the ISPs. You have to find that weighted average. So if you just average the ISPs in this example, you'd be at 53%. So it is not an average of the ISPs. So at 58% for all of these schools, you'd be able to get 92.8% of the meals that you serve reimbursed at the free rate and 7.2 reimbursed at the paid rate, even though they have different eligibilities themselves. Anything to add, anyone, or any more questions coming in from the audience? Let me check to see if anyone's raised their hand. Yeah, I think not. I will just, again, give another ringing endorsement for using this tool. I think for me, we have used it with districts who are still trying to figure out, who are new to CEP, who are trying to figure out what that ideal grouping scenario would be for them. And for schools that have been operating CEP for a long time, but have never really, I see a lot of districts just put them all in one group and claim accordingly. And you, again, are, if you're not in one group reaching that 62.5% threshold with the schools in that group, then you are potentially leaving money on the table, and you don't have to serve one more meal. It's just the way that you are set up to count and claim in your school, in your state agency system. So I've been using meals count going in as kind of a first step to see what the ideal grouping scenario is, kind of look at estimated reimbursement annually per school and per group. And then FRAC has some new calculators that are available at fraccep.org, and they have a district calculator for CEP, a school level calculator for CEP that include all of the different revenues, expenditures, and costs that a school nutrition program might incur. And you can see at the end what traditional counting and claiming and what CEP would look like with that grouping scenario that I took from Meals Count, because we know that it's optimized, having spent 5 minutes in a system running through lots of different algorithms. So the other thing is, I believe this is still true, Nikolai, tell me if it's not, but if your district has 11 schools or fewer, which many districts fall into that bucket, this tool actually runs through every possible grouping scenario. So it uses the exhaustive algorithm to test every possible way that you could group those 11 schools together or adopt on their own, which is, I don't know, how many grouping scenarios does 11 schools have?
I have no idea, but it's a lot. 12 is where the buck stops. But yeah, so 11 schools and less, that actually goes pretty quick because, you know, as these things go, it goes really like that. This is kind of 11 schools, okay, 12 schools, difficult. But yeah, so 11 schools or less, it's going to go pretty quick, and that's going to be basically the absolute maximum of all the schools for reimbursement there. So that definitely gives you the max.
So I don't see any more questions coming in. Thank you so much, Nikolai, for everything that you're doing, but also for sharing about it here. Please do reach out to myself, to Nikolai, to Tam. On Meals Count, you'll see that contact information there in the form for Nikolai. So if you have one of those special scenarios or just want to double check that you used it right, you can reach out to him, and he can help you with the tool. I'm chatting my email address in here. If you have any questions about CEP in general or need some help with financial analyses, we are here to help. So thank you all, and thank you everyone on the phone for all that you're doing to feed kids this year. Oh, it looks like Nikolai and I sent our email addresses to all panelists only, so you didn't get that. Nikolai, if you want to change the to field. Thank you everyone for everything that you're doing to feed kids this school year. We know that it's no easy task under normal circumstances, but this year it's really just amazing what school nutrition departments and nonprofits are able to do to make sure that kids are getting the food that they need to succeed in whatever school environment you're facing this year. So just thank you everyone for all you're doing, and we're here to help if you need it. And with that, have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.